Firstly, our strategy talks to the resources that we require as the entity, so we'll develop our capacity in line with the strategy and the mandate that we have. And all of those things are in progress, and we already have the initial capacity to start performing against the mandate. And we'll grow the capacity on a consistent basis and gradually in line with the resources available. We will also be looking at, because the one thing that will be assisting us to actually pick some of these practices even upfront is in the Act. The Act requires that the major BEE transactions be registered with the Commission. So meaning that every transaction that will take place in this country, if it meets the threshold that the Minister will determine soon, that transaction must be registered with the Commission. Meaning that starting from this year, we will have the BEE transactions registered with the Commission. We'll then have the opportunity to look into the transaction, look into the elements of that transaction that relate to BEE, and when we pick up the elements of fronting or things that will actually undermine the objectives of a BBBEE legislation, we will then provide that feedback to the companies and ask them to redress that. The second thing that also the Act allows us to do is, which is going to assist in our monitoring, because our monitoring does not only have to look at things that have happened in the past, but to actually prevent this fronting from continuing. The Act requires that entities like JSE listed companies, state-owned entities, government departments, they must submit annual reports to the Commission that indicates how they are doing against each and every element of the codes. So those reports will assist us to analyze and also produce the report on the state of BBBEE in this country. So for the first time, the country will have one single report that is based on reports that have been audited, that have been verified, and that have been analyzed by the Commission. We show you how far we're doing, and that will help us now to monitor the pace of transformation on an ongoing basis, as opposed to coming back now in 2030 and looking back, and then we see that the implementation has not been happening correctly. So the overall really function of the Commission is to assist the implementation. So our focus is going to be assisting the implementation in that. As an action in our action plan is obviously the investigations that we are empowered to do in terms of the legislation. So we'll respond to the complaints that are coming in. However, the one thing that is going to be critical for us is the proactive investigations that will be directed by what we see in the market. And those will be assisting us, because then we can deal with systematic issues that we can see in the markets, as opposed to waiting for one single person to complain. So the Commission also has got the proactive powers to initiate its own investigations and make recommendations. And where fronting is found, then they can then actually make a referral for prosecution where the case warrants that. The one thing that is also important for our side to assist the market to ensure that they do BBBEE correctly is the advisory services that we'll be providing to any company. So if any company is planning to enter into a transaction that is a BEE transaction, or that has got an element of BBBEE, and they intend to get points for that transaction, we are saying to them, we will be available to give you advice on that transaction before you even conclude it and finalize it, so that we can then show you the elements which might be of concern, and so that they can be remedied upfront. So that service will be provided in the initial phase free of charge by the Commission, but then as we then implement the legislation, we will then determine the fees for especially those companies that can afford to pay for that advice, to pay for it, so that we can sustain the service for the smaller companies that are not able to pay, so that we can continue to provide it for free for smaller entities, but that bigger companies that can afford can actually just pay for that service for us to sustain it. In terms of the penalties that are available in terms of the BBBEE Act, if a company is found to have been engaged in fronting, and the Minister has indicated, if you look at the definition of fronting, you will see how broad it is. It's not like that thing of a person taking the gardener and making the gardener look like he's a director. It's bigger than that. It's where even when you are a shareholder and you are a really serious shareholder in a company, but you don't actually get any dividends. Your dividends are diverted somehow, that will be fronting. For instance, where you are a shareholder, but you're not allowed to exercise the rights that a shareholder has, for instance, like nominating a director to represent you on the board, that would be fronting. So all of those issues, if you are found to have been engaged in those ones as defined in the Act, then we do have the provision for a fine up to 10% of the company's turnover if the company is found to have been engaged in fronting. And then again, the company, those involved in that company could also be imprisoned in their own personal capacity. They can be imprisoned for up to 10 years or be fined as well, or both. And the other penalty that is in the legislation is that you can also be excluded from doing business with government for up to 10 years. So meaning that depending on the severity of that particular conduct, you could be excluded completely. And so you can imagine if your business relies basically on government, then it means you will not be actually operating.